We spend so much of our lives trying to prove that we are enough, running toward goals and achievements as if they were a finish line that would finally make us feel whole. We chase the promotion, the validation of a partner, the admiration of peers, or the perfection of our daily routines, all hoping that these external markers will silence that nagging doubt in the back of our minds. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the noise finally fades, when the laptop is closed, the lights are dimmed, and the house settles into its own stillness, there is often a lingering, hollow sensation. It is a sense that despite everything we have built, something fundamental is missing. It's that familiar, sharp sting when you feel like you are standing in a crowded room, fully participating in the conversation, yet you feel entirely invisible. You might tell yourself it's just stress, or that you are overreacting, or that you're simply tired. You might rationalize it by saying, "I have everything I need, so why do I feel this way?" But that feeling is not a failure of character. It is a signal. It is your system telling you that you are trying to find love on the outside, while the part of you that needed it most in the past was left waiting in the dark. Think about the times you felt you had to minimize your presence just to fit in, or the times you realized you were holding your breath because you were afraid that if you spoke your truth, you would be seen as a burden. That version of you, the one who learned to stay small, to stay safe, never really went away. They are still sitting inside you, tucked away behind the busy adult life you've constructed. When you feel that hollowness, it is usually because that younger self is reaching out, not for a solution or a fix, but for the one thing they never got: to be fully and truly recognized for who they are, without having to earn it. We often view our loneliness as a flaw, something we should be able to solve with more social interaction or more productivity. But what if the loneliness is simply a symptom of a relationship that has been neglected? What if the reason you feel so unloved is because you have become an expert at overlooking yourself? You have spent years training yourself to look outward for safety, ignoring the fact that the most important connection you will ever have is the one you carry within. When you feel invisible, it's not because people aren't looking at you. It's because you have stopped looking at yourself. You have learned to dismiss your own needs as secondary, labeling your quiet ache as too sensitive or too much. But that ache is the sound of your inner life trying to remind you that you exist. It is a gentle, persistent knock on the door of your consciousness. Learning to open that door, even just a crack, is the first step toward realizing that you have been looking for the wrong kind of love. You have been waiting for someone else to step in and validate your worth, forgetting that the only person who can truly witness the entirety of your story, the parts you keep hidden, the parts you are ashamed of, and the parts that are still grieving, is you. You are allowed to acknowledge that things were hard. You are allowed to admit that you missed out on something vital. Giving yourself permission to stop running from that quiet echo is not a sign of weakness. It is the bravest thing you can do. It is the moment you stop being an observer of your own life and start being a participant in your own healing. You deserve to be seen, first and foremost, by the person who has been there with you the whole time, yourself. When we talk about childhood emotional neglect, we aren't talking about dramatic events or clear, sharp ruptures. It is the quieter, slower erosion of self-worth, the times you needed someone to notice your sadness, but were told to just smile, or the times you had a big idea and were met with a blank stare. These weren't necessarily acts of malice, but they were absences. They were moments where you reached out for emotional connection and met thin air instead of a steady hand. You learned very early on that your internal world was not a priority. You realized that expressing your true feelings brought confusion or indifference rather than the comfort you craved. Over time, you began to build walls. These weren't made of brick and mortar. They were made of silence, self-reliance, and the careful curation of your own needs. You became a master of handling things alone because the risk of being misunderstood felt far worse than the weight of carrying it all by yourself. You learned to be a good person, the one who never complains, the one who is always capable, the one who never needs to lean on anyone. You became a structure of independence, but inside, those walls grew thick and impenetrable. You stopped asking because you were conditioned to believe the answer would be no. Or worse, that your needs were a nuisance. This is the hidden weight of living behind walls you constructed to protect yourself. You believe that these walls are keeping you safe, but they are also keeping you contained. They prevent you from feeling the full depth of your own capacity for joy, because to let in the light, you have to risk letting down the guards you've spent a lifetime perfecting. When you feel unloved now, it is often because you have forgotten that you are the one keeping the gate locked. You have become so adept at hiding your vulnerability that even those who genuinely want to know you struggle to find the cracks. Consider the energy it takes to maintain that distance. It is an exhausting, silent labor. You hold yourself to impossible standards, constantly checking to make sure you aren't imposing on others. You have become the person who apologizes for taking up space, who minimizes your own successes, and who retreats the moment things get too intimate. You are so terrified of the neglect recurring that you neglect yourself first, as a preemptive strike. By being the one to deny your own needs, you regain a sense of control, but you lose the intimacy you deeply desire. The tragedy of these walls is that they were built by a version of you who was trying to survive, but they are being maintained by a version of you who now has the power to thrive. It is time to look at those walls not as a prison, but as a protective construction that has outlived its usefulness. You don't have to tear them down all at once in a violent crash. You can begin by simply removing one stone at a time. That might mean sharing a small, honest feeling with someone you trust, or simply telling yourself, "It is okay that I am struggling today." It means acknowledging that you have been carrying a heavy burden of self-protection that you no longer need. When you start to dismantle the barrier between who you are and who you show the world, you will find that the love you were looking for wasn't missing. It was just waiting for you to create the space to receive it. You are capable of being both strong and soft, both independent and connected. The walls kept you safe when you were small, but today you are ready to walk out into the open. There is a profound, almost jarring stillness that happens when you finally stop looking away from your own reflection. For years, we avoid the mirror, not the glass one in the bathroom, but the internal one. We avoid the version of ourselves that still carries the echoes of the past. As Carl Jung once noted, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This is the core of our struggle. We live as if our reactions, our fears, and our loneliness are inevitable, fixed parts of our character. We call it who I am, but what we are actually describing is a series of subconscious patterns that were laid down before we had the tools to understand them. When we don't acknowledge these patterns, they don't just sit there. They act. They sit in the driver's seat of our lives. They dictate how we react when someone offers us kindness, or how we pull away when things become too stable. We find ourselves in the same emotional loops, feeling unworthy of attention, doubting our instincts, or waiting for the other shoe to drop. And we label it fate. We tell ourselves that some people are just meant to be lonely, or that some people are just destined to work harder for less recognition. But this is the lie of the unconscious. It is a protective illusion meant to keep us from facing the hurt that exists beneath the surface. To face the mirror is to accept that your past is not your identity. It is simply your history. When you look at that reflection, you aren't just seeing the person you are today. You are seeing the result of everything you were taught to believe about your own worth. You might see a person who learned to be quiet so they wouldn't be a burden. You might see someone who learned to be perfect so they would finally be valued. When you recognize these as learned behaviors, rather than essential truths about your nature, the fate begins to dissolve. It takes immense courage to sit with the realization that your pain has a source, and that you have been carrying that source with you, hidden for decades. It feels safer to keep the mirror covered. It feels easier to blame the world, to blame your luck, or to blame your circumstances. But as soon as you own the reality of your history, you take the power back. You stop being a victim of your own unconscious reactions and start becoming the conscious curator of your own healing. You might feel a sense of grief when you look into that mirror, and that is okay. It is a natural response to recognizing the ways you have been left behind by your own self. You are mourning the time you spent feeling like you had to be someone else just to be worthy of presence. But behind that grief is a profound opportunity. You are no longer waiting for life to change for you. You are changing the internal landscape that makes your life possible. The reflection you see is not a final product. It is a work in progress. When you acknowledge the parts of yourself that have been neglected, You are effectively turning toward them and saying, "I see you now." That acknowledgement is the exact opposite of neglect. It is the beginning of a different kind of life, one where you are not being driven by the ghosts of what you didn't get, but by the grounded truth of who you are right now. You are the only person who can hold that mirror steady and look at what is there without judgment. And in that act of seeing, you begin to heal. We often wear our independence like a suit of armor, believing that if we can just carry the weight of our own existence without needing support, we have finally arrived at true strength. We pride ourselves on the "I've got this" mentality. We navigate our careers, our personal lives, and our daily struggles with a rigid, tightly wound sense of control. We pride ourselves on never having to ask for help, on being the person others lean on without ever having to lean back. We equate the ability to function in isolation with being successful, thinking that if we just hold it all together, we are safe from the disappointment of being let down by someone else. But deep down, this isn't strength. It's a survival mechanism, a deeply ingrained habit formed in the shadow of early emotional neglect. When you were younger and realized that the people around you couldn't or wouldn't hold the space you needed for your feelings, you made a logical decision. You decided that relying on others was a path to pain. You decided that the only way to ensure your needs were met was to become the person who had no needs at all. You became a master of handling things alone, of suppressing your own emotions until they were small enough to manage, and of projecting an image of total, impenetrable composure. The problem with this armor is that you eventually forget how to take it off. You start to treat your own emotions as inconveniences, managing your inner life with the same clinical, detached efficiency you use to clear out your inbox or manage a professional project. When a wave of sadness or longing for connection hits, you don't welcome it. You try to solve it like a problem to be corrected. You double down on your work. You fill your schedule with tasks, or you retreat into a headspace of intellectualizing your feelings instead of actually feeling them. You treat your own humanity as if it were a weakness to be optimized out of existence. This self-sufficiency is a lie that keeps you trapped in the very cycle you're trying to escape. By deciding that you don't need anyone, you inadvertently decide that you don't need yourself either. You view your own vulnerability as a malfunction. You feel a sense of pride in your autonomy. But beneath that pride is a profound, aching loneliness. When you deny yourself the experience of relying on others, you miss out on the vital, healing reality of human connection, the experience of being seen, heard, and supported, just as you are, without having to perform or produce. True strength is not found in the ability to carry the world on your shoulders. It is found in the willingness to acknowledge that you are human, and that humans are designed for connection. It is the ability to recognize when you are running on empty and to choose to stop. It is the practice of letting your guard down, not with everyone, perhaps, but with yourself. When you start to challenge this misconception, you might feel a spike of anxiety. It feels unsafe to let go of the control you've relied on for so long. You might worry that if you stop being the one who carries everything, the whole structure will collapse. But that is the voice of the past. The truth is that when you stop holding it all together with sheer force of will, you don't break. Instead, you finally have the space to breathe. You start to understand that being supported is not the same as being broken, and that asking for what you need is not a weakness. It is the ultimate act of self-respect. You are not meant to be a closed system. You are a person, and your need for connection is as real and as vital as your need for air. Allowing yourself to need is the first real step toward no longer feeling unloved. To begin the process of healing, you have to start listening to the things you have been actively training yourself to ignore. This isn't a task you can schedule or a goal you can reach by checking a box. It is a slow, quiet, and deliberate turning inward. Think about the last time you felt a sudden, sharp wave of inadequacy. Perhaps after a piece of neutral feedback at work, a small mistake you made in your daily routine, or a moment where you felt overlooked in a social setting. In those moments, your default response has likely been to dismiss the feeling, to rush to rationalize it away, or to tell yourself that you are being too much or too sensitive. You might even be tempted to push the feeling down with distraction, diving into work, or scrolling through your phone just to stop the internal noise. But this time, I want you to pause before you move to fix it. Before you tell yourself to get over it, I want you to take a breath and turn toward that sensation. Ask yourself, if I were talking to a younger version of me, the one who was left to handle these big feelings alone, what would I say to them in this moment? It sounds simple, but it is deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. It forces you to acknowledge that the person you were back then still lives within you. They are still holding on to the belief that they were not worth the time of day, that their needs were an interruption, and that their sadness was something to be hidden away. When you feel that sudden sting of inadequacy, it is often not about the present moment at all. It is a direct message from that younger part of you who is still waiting for someone to finally see, validate, and understand their experience. Reconnecting with this part of yourself means treating your emotions as if they matter. When you feel lonely, instead of labeling yourself as needy, try saying, I see that I'm feeling lonely right now, and it makes sense that I'd feel that way. When you feel hurt, instead of judging yourself for being fragile, try saying, it's okay to be hurt. I am here for you. This is the opposite of the neglect you experienced. Neglect was the sound of silence when you needed a response. Reconnection is the sound of your own voice becoming a steady, reliable presence in your own life. It is the practice of becoming the person you needed when you were younger. You might find that you have a lot of anger at first, or a sense of deep, heavy grief. That is a natural part of the process. You are realizing that you spent years feeling responsible for a void that was never your fault. Don't rush to move past these emotions. Stay with them. Let yourself be the witness to your own history. This isn't about wallowing. It is about finally giving yourself the attention you were denied. You are essentially teaching your system that it is safe to have needs again. Each time you acknowledge your own inner world, when you name your emotions, when you honor your exhaustion, when you offer yourself a moment of genuine kindness, you are repairing a connection that has been frayed for years. You are building a home within yourself that is not based on achievement or perfection, but on the simple, unconditional acceptance of your own existence. You are starting to treat yourself like you truly matter, because, in truth, you always have. True healing is about learning how to attune to yourself, the way a supportive person should have attuned to you when you were growing up. Attunement is a quiet, rhythmic dance of awareness. It is the ability to notice what is happening inside you, the tightness in your chest, the exhaustion in your limbs, the flicker of apprehension, and to respond to it with warmth and curiosity rather than judgment or dismissal. For most of your life, you likely operated on a kind of autopilot, pushing through your own signals until you were completely disconnected from your physical reality. You treated your body and your emotions as instruments to be used rather than as a part of you to be cared for. Learning to attune is the process of reversing that. It means noticing when you are truly tired and actually giving yourself permission to rest, rather than treating rest as a reward you haven't earned yet or a luxury you can't afford. It means acknowledging your frustration instead of telling yourself that you have no right to be upset. It is the practice of being present with yourself in the moments when you are struggling, offering the same level of concern you would instinctively give to a friend in the same position. When you notice that you are reaching for a distraction, scrolling through your phone to avoid a quiet moment, or burying yourself in a project to escape a heavy feeling, I want you to try something different. Pause, and instead of judging the urge, acknowledge it. Tell yourself, I am trying to protect myself right now because I am afraid of what I might feel if I stay still. By naming the experience, you are no longer a victim of your own habits. You are an active participant in your own internal world. You are essentially becoming the parent you needed, providing the consistent, loving attention that was missing. Attunement also means learning the language of your own needs. For so long, you were taught that your needs were a secondary concern. Now, you have to learn to recognize them as vital information. When you feel a sudden, sharp urge to pull away from someone, or a wave of anxiety in a social setting, ask yourself what it is you need in that moment. Do you need a moment of space to center yourself? Do you need to express that you are feeling overwhelmed? You are practicing the art of being your own advocate. This process is not about reaching a state where you are always happy or always calm. That isn't human. It is about becoming the kind of person who can move through the world with a sense of internal security. Even when things are chaotic outside, you know that you are not going to abandon yourself. You are building a foundation of trust where you know that whatever you feel, whether it's joy, grief, anger, or confusion, you will have the space to hold it. You are teaching your nervous system that it is finally safe to settle down. Each time you notice a feeling and treat it with kindness, you are laying down a new pattern of safety. You are proving to yourself that you are worthy of your own care. Over time, this makes the world feel like a much less lonely place, because you are no longer searching for validation from the outside to fill a void that only your own presence can soothe. You are becoming your own most reliable witness, and in that, you are discovering a sense of peace that is entirely your own. This part of the journey is perhaps the most delicate, because it requires you to navigate the space between acknowledging your pain and releasing the heavy burden of resentment. When we look back at our upbringing, it is natural to want to point to specific reasons why we feel the way we do, to find the source of the neglect so we can finally make sense of our current struggles. But this is not about assigning blame or building a case against the past. It is about understanding the architecture of your emotional life so you can finally move through it without carrying the weight of the wreckage. When you look back at your childhood, it is helpful to recognize that the adults who were responsible for your care were likely operating from their own set of profound limitations. They were people who, in many cases, were never taught how to attune to themselves, let alone to you. They may have been managing their own silent, invisible struggles, pressures, fears, and internal voids that were never addressed. When you see that their behavior was often a reflection of their own incomplete history, rather than a judgment on your value, the narrative shifts. This isn't about excusing behavior that left you feeling invisible or unimportant. It is about accepting the reality of what happened so you can stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and start asking, "What happened to me?" That distinction is incredibly liberating. It moves the burden of your suffering from your character to your history. You are no longer responsible for the emotional environment you were born into, but you are now responsible for the emotional environment you are creating for yourself today. When you release the need to blame, you stop waiting for the past to apologize. So often, we get stuck in a state of arrested development, hoping that if we just make someone else understand how much they hurt us, we will finally be validated. But relying on someone else's acknowledgement to heal your own inner child is a recipe for more disappointment. By letting go of the blame, you stop giving the past the power to dictate your future. You stop trying to change the unchangeable and start directing that energy toward your own growth. It is a profound act of self-parenting to look back and say, "I see that you were doing the best you could with what you had, even if it wasn't enough for me." This isn't a passive statement. It is a way of reclaiming your agency. You are acknowledging the deficit without letting it define your worth. You are taking the experiences that were painful and using them as the foundational knowledge for how to do things differently. You are deciding that the pattern ends with you. As you do this, you might notice that the anger begins to soften. You might feel a strange, quiet sense of freedom. You are no longer trying to force the people of your past to become the parents you needed. You are realizing that you are now the person you were always waiting for. You are the one who can provide the validation, the presence, and the understanding that you missed out on. By shifting your perspective from victimhood to self-responsibility, you take your power back. You aren't erasing your history, but you are no longer letting it write your future. You are writing that story yourself, one moment of self-compassion at a time, and that is a truly empowering way to move forward. We spend so much of our lives reaching outward, searching for validation from partners, friends, or even professional achievements, hoping that if someone else just tells us we are doing a good job or that we matter, the persistent, hollow feeling will finally disappear. We look for external confirmation to fill the space where a solid sense of self should be. We measure our worth by the reactions of others. If they are happy, we feel safe. If they are distant, we feel abandoned. But the truth is that validation from others is like trying to fill a leaking vessel. It might offer a brief, temporary sense of relief, but it never stays, and it never truly reaches the core of the ache you are carrying. True, lasting validation has to come from within. It is a language you have to learn to speak to yourself, often from scratch. It is the practice of saying, "I see that you are hurting, and your hurt matters, even if no one else acknowledges it." It is the act of giving yourself the permission to feel exactly what you are feeling, without the immediate, reflexive urge to apologize for it or fix it. You don't need your sadness to be solved for it to be real. You don't need your fear to be rational for it to be worthy of your own care. Think about the times you have minimized your own experiences. Maybe you've said, "I shouldn't feel this way," or "other people have it much worse." When you do that, you are repeating the same neglect you experienced in childhood. You are essentially telling your inner self that their experience isn't valid. Self-validation is the radical act of reversing that script. It is the ability to look at yourself in a moment of struggle and say, "This is hard for me, and I deserve to have someone on my side right now." When you start to speak to yourself with this level of validation, the constant, desperate search for external approval begins to quiet down. You stop feeling like you are constantly auditioning for the right to be loved. You realize that you don't need to prove your value through your productivity or your perfection, because you have already decided that your value is inherent. You are validating your own existence, independent of what anyone else thinks or provides. This takes practice. It feels strange at first, perhaps even a bit selfish, because you were taught that your needs were a burden. But remember, self-validation is not about narcissism. It is about self-repair. It is the most loving thing you can do for the part of you that was left unseen. When you acknowledge your feelings, when you tell yourself, "I am allowed to be upset," or "It makes sense that I would feel overwhelmed after everything I've been through," you are creating a sanctuary within. As you get better at this language, you'll find that you stop needing to defend your reality. You become less sensitive to criticism and less dependent on praise, because your internal world is no longer a chaotic, unacknowledged mess. It is a space where you are finally paying attention. You are no longer waiting for the world to give you permission to be real. You are giving that permission to yourself every single day. And in that, you stop being a beggar for love and become the one who is finally providing it in abundance to the only person who can truly make it stick: you. As you continue this journey of turning toward yourself, you will notice a subtle but profound shift in how you inhabit your own skin. You are no longer compartmentalizing your life, keeping the successful version of you, the one who handles everything with poise and efficiency, on one side, and the lonely version of you, the one who still aches for connection, on the other. You are bringing them together. You are realizing that these are not separate entities, but two sides of the same whole. You are finally allowing your vulnerability to exist alongside your strength, and in doing so, you are becoming a fully realized person. This process of integration is essentially the work of making yourself whole again. For years, you likely kept your hidden self locked away because you believed that being seen in your entirety was a liability. You thought that if people saw the hurt, the confusion, or the quiet longing, they would turn away. So, you presented a curated version of yourself to the world. But that curation is exactly what fueled the feeling of being unloved. It's hard to feel loved when you know that the love is being offered only to the armor, not to the person inside. Integration is the courage to drop the mask. It is the decision that you would rather be seen, even if it is uncomfortable, than be known only for the image you've constructed. When you allow your full human experience to exist, you are giving yourself permission to be messy, to be uncertain, and to be deeply, beautifully flawed. You are acknowledging that your strength is not diminished by your capacity to feel pain. Rather, your strength is defined by your ability to hold that pain with compassion. This isn't about being fixed and never feeling lonely again. That is a myth that only keeps us chasing an unattainable perfection. You are a human being, which means you will always have moments of doubt, moments of disconnection, and moments where you feel small. The difference now is that you know how to be there for yourself when those moments arrive. You are no longer standing on the outside of your own life, looking in. You are home. You are present with your own emotions, and you are no longer trying to exile the parts of yourself that need the most care. Think of it as weaving different threads into a single fabric. Your past experiences, your current struggles, your hopes, and your fears, they all belong to you. When you stop pushing the difficult parts away, they stop consuming all your energy. You stop fighting yourself. You start to find that you have more capacity for joy because you aren't so busy holding back the tide of your own buried history. You are becoming a person who can handle the full spectrum of human experience, the light and the shadow, the joy and the grief, without falling apart, because you have finally anchored yourself in the center of it all. This is the most honest way to live. When you are integrated, you show up in your relationships differently. You aren't reaching for others to complete you because you have done the work of gathering your own scattered pieces. You are no longer looking for someone else to fill the void, so you can actually engage with them as a peer, as an equal, and as a whole person. You are inviting them to see the real you, and that is where the deepest form of love begins. It is not a love that you have to earn, or a love you have to perform for. It is a love that arises naturally from the simple, profound act of being real. You are finally, truly showing up for your own life, and that is the most beautiful thing you can do. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to have needs that aren't tied to your productivity, your usefulness to others, or how much you can handle without complaint. For so long, you measured your worth by how little space you occupied and how much you could provide for those around you, as if existing as a human with basic emotional requirements were an imposition on the world. But that belief system is a ghost of a past that no longer dictates your reality. As you continue to acknowledge your own inner world, the feeling of being unloved begins to transform. You start to see that you were never inherently unlovable. You were simply unwitnessed, and you were waiting for someone else to hold the mirror up to your soul. Now, you have the power to be your own witness. Every day is a fresh chance to provide the care that you didn't receive. You are the architect of your own emotional safety, and you are far more capable of building that than you have ever allowed yourself to believe. This isn't about ignoring the world or withdrawing into yourself. It is about cultivating such a deep, grounded sense of connection with your own inner life that you no longer feel the need to beg for crumbs of affection from others. You are moving from a state of hunger to a state of wholeness. When you look forward, understand that the path isn't a straight line toward a final destination where everything is perfect and the pain is gone. The path is simply the practice of returning to yourself over and over again. It is the commitment to listen when you are tired, to honor when you are hurt, and to celebrate when you feel joy, without needing external validation to prove that these things are real. It is about trusting that you are the one person who will always be there, through every season, through every transition, and through every shadow. As you walk this path, you will notice that the people in your life begin to relate to you differently. When you stop requiring others to fill a void that only you can heal, you open the door to relationships that are based on choice rather than need, on freedom rather than obligation. You start to attract connection that is reciprocal because you are no longer projecting your own unmet needs onto everyone you meet. You are showing up as a person who knows their own worth. And that is a magnetism that cannot be manufactured. The healing you are doing is not just for you. It is a profound shift in the way you interact with the world. You are becoming a person who is anchored. You are becoming a person who can handle the unpredictable nature of life because you have developed an unshakable trust in your own ability to care for yourself. You are no longer looking for someone else to be the parent you needed. You have taken on that role, and in doing so, you have finally given the younger version of you exactly what they needed all along: a secure, loving, and consistent home. Keep going. The work of self-discovery is the most important labor you will ever undertake. You are not a broken thing that needs to be fixed. You are a person who has been disconnected, and you are currently in the process of reclaiming your wholeness. It is a slow process, and it takes time to dismantle the old habits of self-neglect. But every small moment of self-compassion is a building block in the foundation of your new life. You have the wisdom, you have the capacity, and you have the history to guide you. You are your own best companion. You are your own greatest advocate, and you are the love you have been searching for. The path forward is truly internal, and it has been waiting for you to walk it all along. As you step away from this reflection and back into the flow of your daily life, realize that you are not returning to the same world you left. You are returning with a new awareness. The loneliness that once felt like a permanent shadow has begun to lose its density, not because the circumstances of your life have suddenly transformed, but because you have changed your relationship to yourself. You have moved from being an exile in your own life to becoming the steady, reliable guardian of your own inner world. Remember that there is no end to this process. There is no milestone where you suddenly stop being human, stop feeling the sting of rejection, or stop needing comfort. Healing is not a destination. It is a way of walking through the world. It is a quiet, constant commitment to checking in with yourself, to noticing the subtle shifts in your mood, and to honoring the part of you that still remembers what it was like to be small and unseen. When you feel that old, familiar pull to hide or to perform, let it be a reminder. Instead of falling back into the cycle of neglect, let it be a trigger for connection. Use it as a signal to pause, to breathe, and to offer yourself the very thing you once waited for others to provide. If you found this reflection helpful and want to continue exploring the journey of self-discovery and inner work, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. By turning on notifications, you'll be the first to know when our next deep dive session is released. If these words resonated with your own experience, please leave a comment below. Your stories remind us that we are navigating this path of healing together. For those who want to support the creation of this content and help ensure these resources remain available for everyone, you can find the link to join our community in the description below. Thank you for being here and for choosing to show up for yourself today.